If you would just bow your heads for a word of prayer. Thanks. That's it. That's probably the first prayer you've ever heard where it was truly a word of prayer. But that word has a lot in it. It really does. I was watching a minister this morning on television, and they were mentioning that someone was being helped, and because the person did not say thank you, they cut off the help. You know, we just need to tell God thanks. We really do. And even though that was a harsh thing to do because they explained the person was going through some dire circumstances and just all discombobulated, so they were really having some major issues, and it didn't register in their mind to say thank you, and perhaps a person shouldn't have cut them off. But I've had some situations where I was helping people, and God said, after I'd helped them for so long a period of time, he said, everyone who has not thanked you, cut them off. I had a situation even recently where he said, even though they have not thanked you, you shall not cut them off, but neither shall you increase it. Some of your increases and your blessings are either being cut off or not increased because you're simply not thankful. There's a principle that goes with that for all God has done for you, and some people are doing some stuff. You know, and I understand how God can feel, because sometimes you give your blood, sweat, and tears to help folk, and they just don't even, you know what I mean? Sometimes they're not only are they not thankful, they're critical. So you can, if you're not thankful, there's a spiritual force that blocks your blessing just because of the lack of that one simple word of thanks. I am thankful to see so many of you here today. I didn't know whether the church was going to be empty today because of my message on last week dealing with Trump. So I just, as a Lord, I'm surprised. Like, if anything, is more people here than normal. So I said, I don't know who, and sometimes that happens. You know, sometimes folk won't show up because they're mad, and other times folk, let me see what he's going to say today. If he that crazy last week, let me see what he's going to say crazy today. So I don't know whether some of you all are here just to see what crazy I'm going to say today. But I do have to sort of talk about a little bit of what I talked about on last week for a couple of reasons. First reason, because most people were not obedient. But what do you mean obedient? I told you don't focus on what I said about Trump. Focus on what God spoke to you. Remember that you are in the ark. And my guess is the vast majority of people did not talk about remembering they're in the ark. They talked about what I said about Trump. And I know because that's what I talked about. So I'm just as guilty as you are. I forgot myself about what God said last week. Remember that you are in the ark. Today is November the 1st, 2020. On November the 3rd, we will have the presidential election. And as I told you last week, some of you have already voted. First thing, make sure you vote. That's number one. That's perhaps been one of our weakest areas in our community, is the fact that we have had an extremely low voter turnout historically. And people, our ancestors, bled and died for that right. It's a shame when we got all these excuses about what, and we get anywhere else we want to go. So even though we say, well, I don't have a way, you get anywhere else you want to go. And if it was a concert to see somebody you want to see, you stand in line all night long. People are at the Apple store overnight. They literally will camp out at the Apple store. That's the apple with the bite out of it that really symbolizes something else. But they will camp out overnight to get the new iPhone. But we won't stand in line to vote because it's inconvenient. So regardless of who you vote for, make sure that you go and vote, because some groups depend on us having a lackadaisical spirit and not going and vote. And we went through water hoses, death, lynchings, all beatings, jailings, all kinds of stuff for the right to vote. That's why when people, sometimes if you don't have any stripes on your back, you don't appreciate it. And you don't really, it doesn't matter to you because you have not put sweat and blood and tears and pain into the thing, and therefore it means nothing to you. And that's why so many of us now in this generation, we don't vote because we haven't paid the price for it, and we have forgotten how much it costs to get the right to vote. And we've got some of the lowest voter percentages of anybody. So if you don't go vote, it doesn't matter who you vote for. See, because when we vote, people will recognize that these folks vote. I got to see about it. But if you're not voting, they don't care about you. So you have to make sure, first and foremost, that you go and vote regardless of who you vote for. Make your voice count without excuse. Because there's a ton of excuses why you say, I don't need to go vote. You got a ton of excuses. But your forefathers bled too much for you to sit on your behind with an excuse. They really did. They bled and died too much for you to sit on your behind with an excuse. Go and vote and do not miss voting. Now what I talked about last week was who God told me to vote for, who is Donald John Trump. Just in case you didn't know his full name. I will admonish you to seek God. And I've had a lot of conversation with people from last week about the message that I brought about who God told me to vote for. And last night, I had to go and actually research it. I said, everyone that I've seen prior to this, everything I've heard, every prophetic voice has all pointed to Trump. I said, let me find if I can find anybody that's pointing prophetically to Biden. So I searched. I couldn't find not a one. So it's been a solid uniform, and I've had people who I know who've come to me and said, and they were upset because they said, I asked God, and it's been universal. There's been no exception. It's been universal, Trump, Trump, Trump. Now, I've had people say, I think. Now, when it gets to I think, whole different ballgame. It's a different person. But on everyone, when they say, I asked God, it has all been one man, and that man is Donald John Trump. Now, I know how upsetting it is to some people. Trust me, I know this. But I want you to go and actually, while I was searching yesterday to see if I could find anyone in the prophetic realm who had said God told them to vote for Biden. I wanted to find that person. I just couldn't find them. Everybody, bar none, and I found a whole bunch of them. Everybody said one man, and that one man was Donald John Trump. But I found one Indian who had an interesting experience. He said actually he was taken up to heaven, and God explained some things to him. And he was Indian. He's dressed in his orange robe. I want you to go and watch the YouTube video, and I put it where it's easy for you to find. I put it up on the screen, I think it's slide number 2 that says coachb.tv/Trump 2020. This will take you to that video. It's about 30 minutes long. And I would encourage you to go and watch this. coachb.tv/Trump 2020. And what he said was interesting because it related on another level beyond just the election. What he did, he said in all of his years of preaching, and he's a Christian minister. It's on the screen, coachb.tv/Trump 2020. That will take you to that video. And it's a real interesting video, but what he said was this. He said he's never done this before in all of his years of preaching. And you can see him there. He's gray-headed, got a long white beard. So he looks like he's 65, 70 years old. And he said he's never done this before. He's never placed anything on the pulpit before, on the podium. But he took out a bag and he placed on the podium, it was a scale. And he said when he was taken up into heaven, God said the scale represented America was up for judgment. And the scale represented judgment. And the thing about the scale that was particular to me, every July from July of 2024, I'm going to be gone. I'm taking the month of July and doing something else. This July, I spent the first 3 weeks in New Orleans. While I was in New Orleans, I was out walking, and sometimes I'll go walking 10, 15 miles. I was downtown walking. I walked past this antique store, and when I walked past the antique store, I heard God say, go in that store. So I went in the store, and immediately when I went in the store, there was an item that caught my eye. The item was an ancient scale. And I went over to the scale, and instantly when I saw the price, I knew I was going to buy it. There was just no question. I want you to put up the slide number 1. This is the price that I photographed. Can you see that price? Well, if you can't read it, it says 120. 120. That was the price. The reason I knew that I was going to buy the scale was because 120 was where I was going to put the scale, which is the number to our office building. It's located at 120. So when I saw that price corresponding to the number of the building, I knew exactly that I was going to buy this scale, and I knew that I was going to put it in the lobby. And I told the young lady who handles those things, I said, look, I want you to find a table for this scale. I want you to get the scale cleaned up because it was real old. I had cleaned it up as best I could. It's made out of brass, so it looks like gold. I said, I want you to find a table that really fits this. And she came back to me about a week later. She said, Mr. Bronner, I found a serious table, but this thing is expensive. I said, how much is it? She said, a table, $4,000. I said, well, look. She said, yeah, it's got this gold. And she showed me the picture of it. I said, go ahead and buy that table. Even though it's expensive, I don't know what. When God leads me to something, he always provides. She came back a couple of days later. She said, I kept looking because that was a lot of money. I found it for under half of that price, but it's still expensive. The table is there in the office. The scale is going to be placed on it soon, and I have a little plaque that goes with it. My vision was that basically it would say, let your good always vastly outweigh your evil. So when everybody walked into the office, they would see this little bitty piece of evil on one side, and they would see all this good on the other side. And it would remind people when they walked in the office, always let your good vastly, because nobody's got no evil. That's just not going to happen. What you need to do is have your good vastly outweigh your evil. And I wanted that scale in the office so that people could see it. But when I watched this Indian pastor talking, and he put this scale up on the podium, it had a different meaning. And I emailed the young lady and said, I want that scale in the office by Tuesday, by the time this election hit, because the scale represented, and this is what he said in his message, what God spoke to him. He said the scale represented the judgment that would come on America if they chose the wrong king. So from everything I could find, all of the prophetic has all said one thing. Everybody, to a person that I have heard who said they've asked God, has all pointed to one man. God's choice is Donald John Trump. Now, a lot of y'all got a lot of issues with it. I understand that. I understand it without question. But they're your issues. And it's your thought. And I have learned the hard way. Y'all say the hard way. I have learned the hard way the stuff I think and the stuff God thinks is often from a whole different perspective. And when this pastor said he took him up to heaven, and God explained that Trump needs 2 terms to do what he is supposed to do. And see, his first term, he said what God mainly wanted him to accomplish was to bring peace to Israel. Most of y'all don't even know about what Trump has done in Israel. All you got is all this other mess that God is not concerned about. He says his main function was to bring peace in Israel for his first term. Most folks, they don't even know Trump even been to Israel. They don't know what he's doing over there. See, that's why I'm saying sometimes God has a He has a plan that's just not your plan. And some things what God is concerned about are not the things you're concerned about. We're concerned about how our hair look in the morning. And we're more concerned sometimes about how our hair looks than how our soul looks. So sometimes what God is concerned about and what you're concerned about, they're radically different. That's why I had to learn to ask God, Lord, who do you want me? Now, it doesn't mean he's going to win. But what that pastor who was taken to heaven said, this is what will happen if America chooses the wrong president. And it's not unusual for America to make wrong choices. It's not unusual for us to make wrong choices. You know, we done made some wrong choices in our life. God let you make that wrong choice, but you sure end up saying at the end, I sure wish I hadn't chosen it. I sure wish I had chosen what God told me to choose. You end up saying that in the end, and usually when we make a choice against God's direction, and I know folk do it because I see it too much. I tell people this is what God said. I don't want to do that. And they make their own choice, and they end up down the road. You know, Pastor, I now see why God told you that. Now I see. So your choice may not be God's choice. And America's choice may not be God's choice. But that's not what I want you to remember. What did I tell you to remember last week? You are in the ark. So regardless of what America chooses, regardless of what you see, and that's why he said the message for last week, remember that you are in the ark no matter what happens around you, no matter what you see. Remember that you are in the ark. I don't know what choice America is going to make. But you remember you were in the ark. And the message was streaming on television from last week. So the whole city now is going to see this message that I talked about. God told me, and God was going to say, man, you add that on. I didn't know if you were even going to add that on television. Well, if God said it, I'm just not scared of it. It's bottom line. I'm sure he said it. I'm not worried about it. So, but the thing about it, there may be some flack from that. That's all right. There's usually flack when God's got a word that goes against what the public wants. That's usually flack on that without exception. But as I was listening to the message, it brought back something. What was the price on those scales? $120. If you remember the message from last week, how long did God give the people in the days of Noah to get straight? 120 years. I said, oh my goodness, that scale that God had me to buy was $120. It's going at the address of 120. God gave the people 120 years to get right. So now the scale doesn't just represent the balance of good and evil. It represents God's grace for you to get right. And I'm going to invite you, if you want to come out to the office to see it, and it's not up yet, and I've got one other thing God spoke yesterday I'm putting in there. So if you want to come at the first of next year, check with Suzanne. She'll give you the address, and we'll invite you out, and you can see what is, and you can look at the scale yourself. But I believe God is bringing a judgment upon this land. But remember, you are in the ark. And see, we're focused sometimes on so much of the stuff that really, it matters to us, but it's not that big a deal with God. He got to get some other stuff straight first. And there's some things that even when you start looking into all of the stuff, to be honest about it, personally, I don't want either candidate. To be perfectly honest, I don't want either candidate. I'm just being honest about it. If God hadn't spoken, I probably would have voted for Biden, but to be honest, I ain't crazy about Biden. Trump would not let black folk into his units that he built in New York. He had a federal mandate or federal suit that they filed against him for discriminating against. That's absolutely true. Trump did that. Biden was the co-author of the crime bill along with Clinton that most folk don't know. That crime bill put thousands of black men in jail unjustly. So Trump blocked some folk out of his housing unit. Biden put folk unwelcome for 10 years of prison term by the thousands. So I'm not particular about either one of them. So it didn't. So with me, I had a bad choice. It's just like the last election. I didn't want either one of them. So I didn't. It's like the Bible when they talk about the bramble bush. To me, they were all bramble bushes. But this is one thing I also want you to remember. There was no king who didn't have problems. When you look at, if you say who was the greatest king, that's going to be David and Solomon. Both of them had a massive issue. You look at David, shoot, David had all kind of stuff. David had all kind of stuff. Now, most of us are familiar with Bathsheba, so it ain't just Trump that had women problems. David had women problems. So David had one, because all the men who know that women can present you with some problems, say amen. Amen. Women can be some problems. Pastor done had some women problems. So trust me, women can create some problems. So David had a whole bunch of women problems, and then you remember what happened when David went and counted the people after God told him not to count the people? And God came, I'm going to give you the choice. You can either be judged, because I take this choice. And still, I think it killed 75,000 folk because of David's bad choice. So all of the kings have had issues. There is no perfect flesh. All of the kings. And these were kings chosen by God. So just because God chooses the king, that by no means means the king is perfect. Everybody in human form has some issues. And that does not exclude presidents. Presidents got all kind of problems. And there's two kind of problems the president has. Those you know about and those you don't know about. Just like it's two kind of problems pastors have. Those you know about and those you don't know about. Every pastor got their segment of problem. Every president has. So Trump just has a few of the problems you know about. Biden has a few of the problems you know about. The stuff we know about is not as big as the stuff we don't know about. I can guarantee you that. So all of them got problems. So you're not going to get a perfect president. And if it were left up to me, I don't want either one of them. But I do want God's choice. And I did vote for God's choice. So I'm not telling you who to vote for. What I am asking you to do is this. If you haven't voted, go to the polls, ask God, who do I vote for? And you vote for who God tells you to vote for. And I just pray that this country still has God's grace and mercy. But what I do know is what he has told you. Remember, you are in the ark. Remember, you are in the ark. Remember, because he knows this stuff is coming. And he knows we may choose the wrong man. We'll at least choose the man he doesn't want. He knows that. When you study the Bible, God didn't want the people to have a king to start with. You remember that? He didn't want them to have a king to start with. And the folks said, look, give us a king. Give us a king. He said, look, if I give you a king, he's going to tax you. He's going to send your sons off to war. He's going to take your land. He's going to do all this stuff if I give you a king. They didn't care. Give us a king. So the king was never God's design in the first place. And the king they chose, or the king God chose to be the king, was Saul. Saul didn't want to be king. Saul went and hid. When Samuel told him, look, this God has spoken that you are the chosen to lead Israel. You're supposed to be the king. And he knew the prophet was right. So not only did God not want the people to have a king, the king didn't want to be king. So this stuff is nothing new. And we've got to understand some of these things. All this stuff is a repetition over and over and over and over and over and over. So your king will never be perfect. Your president will never be perfect. They're going to have a pile of known and unknown flaws. All you can do is seek God, who you are to vote for, and get off your behind if you have not voted, and vote without excuse for somebody. So go and vote. We just bled too much not to.